I was going to talk about disruptive economies and how governments should cope with them. And then this morning, I'm sure all of you saw the newspaper about how governments actually disrupt themselves and what an absolutely amazing change the UAE itself is doing in terms of disrupting government in order to enable the country to keep pace with disruptive economies. So that's an example of keeping ahead and keeping a pace with the times, because change is moving much faster than all of us think. And it's a positive change. And what do I mean when I talk about change? It's because there's a change around technology, there's a change around intellectual power, the so-called knowledge economy. There is entrepreneurial freedom at a level that we have not experienced before, driven essentially by connectivity. And most important of all, it's also about how governments should be adapting to all of this change and to do so at speed. Now, let's put it in perspective for a second. What exactly do we mean by that? The technological growth that we're experiencing right now. Globally, we have about 3.2 billion people that are now using the internet. 2 billion of those are living in what people mistakenly call emerging markets. I call them growth markets because that's where future growth is going to happen. And just to put it in perspective, in the year 2000, there were about 400 million internet users around the world, and 100 million of them were in these markets. Data traffic is expected to grow nearly tenfold in the coming 5 years, and by 2020, there's going to be another 3 billion smartphones in these markets alone. Now, what that means for all of us is that we have to adapt, we have to be completely clear about where the opportunity is, and to understand what disruption means and how is it changing our world. So I remember when I was a kid, my mother used to get a report card saying he is a disruptive influence. I'm very happy to say that 50 years on, my mother can now relax because it's no longer a bad word. In today's world, disruptive behavior is actually encouraged. So we look at people like Elon Musk, we look at Zuckerberg, Steve Jobs, all of them are actually revered for being disruptive. And these industries, these actors, these people are leading to the emergence of these disruptive economies as well. And as investors in traditional businesses, I have to say watch out, and governments should watch out, because that is the manner in which our lives are going to be governed in the future. Now, new industries, what do I mean by disruption? What do we all mean by disruption? New industries are being created at a very rapid speed out of nothing. So Amazon started out by disrupting the book trade, and then it became a mail order industry, and now it's leveraging its e-commerce platform to, in effect, sell us just about everything. Alibaba did the same, and now look at its market value, $160 billion, created by a man who was a school teacher, a non-techie, and therefore there's hope for all of us as well in terms of where we can drive change. The second big disruption, of course, is disintermediation. Removing the intermediary by creating a direct access between a producer, a service provider, and the consumer. And peer-to-peer connectivity is driving the emergence of these disruptive economies. You have to look at Lyft, you have to look at Airbnb, and we're, of course, all extremely proud that within our own markets, we have a fantastic example that is fast emerging, like Careem. Now, what is the role of government vis-a-vis all of this disruption, and how should government be adapting to this opportunity? It's to organize, it's to facilitate, it's to allow private industry to grow, to find itself, and to reinvent these markets, and to be there as a partner in that progress. And the government in the UAE is a classic example of that, and more governments need to follow that example. Now, I'm a big believer in the following statement, which is that governments should be in the business of governance and not in the business of management. They should leave the ownership and management to the private sector, where market forces operate freely, and therefore there is an opportunity for the best to succeed and the worst to fall. Governments, generally speaking, are not very well prepared around the world. Rules and regulations are not up to speed. Some governments still use fax machines, would you believe? And laws relating to business startup, business failure, the opportunity to operate in a level playing field, all of this needs to be sorted out and thought through, because some of our laws are archaic and some of our laws need to be adapted in order to freely allow entrepreneurs and innovation to thrive. And what that means, by the way, is to enable youth, which is our most potent, our most important force, to be harnessed, to promote entrepreneurship, professional entrepreneurship, enable more technology to be accessible by more people. Internet and mobile phones have completely changed the way in which we think, we operate, we transact, we consume. And we have to, as a result of all of that, create larger markets. So the UAE is a market, but it happens to be placed in the middle of a marketplace of 3 billion people. That's a very powerful statement. And then governments, of course, have to understand that they have to set the tone by innovating themselves and partnering with the private sector in innovative ways. And being from the private sector, being a recipient of that in the UAE, I have to say that this public-private partnership that exists in this country is extremely effective for the facilitation of entrepreneurship and trade. And if you think about it, we have one example here, and then we have one example in Silicon Valley. And you may think I'm jumping the gun a little bit by comparing, but we have to remember that unicorns not created unicorn companies because they have horns on their head or that people are extra special and have suddenly arrived from Mars. They're born in places like Silicon Valley because the enabling environment and the necessary conditions that are conducive to growth happen to exist in that particular place. And that is what Dubai is doing. And that is why Dubai, located where it is, and the UAE, is an enormous facilitator for entrepreneurship in this region as well. Now, the final point that I wanted to make around what governments can do is freedom of intellect. Freedom of intellect has to be the greatest enabler that a government can provide. But it does so productively, and it does so for the pursuit of intellectual enhancement. Too many people hide behind this facade that if you allow a freedom of intellect, and you do so just in terms of condemning what currently exists, in my opinion, that's just plain wrong. Freedom of intellect should be allowed in order for all of us to pursue a more level playing field and a more clarified business environment and structure. And what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that all of us, wherever we operate and in whichever country we operate, and there are people from many countries visiting here, we have to all understand why do certain environments flourish? Why is it that certain governments promote the flourishing of environments? And why is it, for example, that in Dubai, I and many other people in this audience, as entrepreneurs, have flourished as well? It's because we, all of us, are engines of disruption. If you look at the fact that the oil industry, on which so much of this region depends, oil revenues accounted for 90% of the UAE's GDP at the time it was founded in 1971. Today, it's down to 30%. And Dubai has transformed itself into a commercial hub for tourism, for culture, for shipping, for air traffic, not just around trade. And it's enabled the emergence of a number of key disruptors as well. Souk.com, that a lot of you use on a virtual daily basis. Careem, which is now the Middle East's fastest car booking service, and rides growing at the rate of 20 to 30% every month. These are winning formulas where you have a localized product, you have regional brands aligning with the region's values, deep partnerships with local regulators, and understanding of the marketplace by the regulator, governments, and big brands. So I, and many people in this room spring from this enabling environment. We came out of the enabling environment of the UAE, scaled up from being small players to being global players, and could not have built that, actually, if it hadn't been for that public-private partnership that I'm talking about. As we look forward, what is it that we should be looking at? We need to continue to encourage entrepreneurship as being the heart, the engine of disruption. We need to encourage more entrepreneurs to enter our markets. We need to give them tools to succeed. We need to create role models. Then we need to finance them. Entrepreneurs exist and thrive across the world, and they're flourishing in growth markets more than most other places. What they lack across growth markets is that enabling environment and governments that are partners in fulfilling their aspirations. This country, and I'm not just saying this because I live here and I work here, but this country is a great example for the region to follow and for more and more markets to follow. And we're seeing more platforms emerging from this market as well. For example, Wamda.com, Wamda Capital, which is all around entrepreneurship in the venture capital space, local solutions which are outperforming international options as well. Disruption's here. It's going to stay. It's in large part driven by entrepreneurs. Often it's driven by sheer necessity because these markets need that disruption, need the low-cost opportunity in order to be able to succeed. And once we have this understanding between government and the private sector, that innovation and the fact that both parties are learning from each other, that they're enabling disruption in a proactive basis from each other and with each other, then, as we saw yesterday in the announcement in the UAE, governments need to disrupt themselves as well in order to stay on top of the game. And that, I think, is the overriding message, which is that in today's world, where more and more countries are differentiating themselves and attracting talent, where capital is becoming a globalized product, and where talent has a free movement and mobility, every country has to project itself and attract itself in order to be able to bring the best minds to focus and enable that country to grow. So finally, unleashing freedom to operate without stifling bureaucracy, the execution and the embracing of technology, disruption, etc., is what governments should be really focused on. It is what they should think of as their KPIs. And remember, please, that 50% of the world's population is under the age of 25. And this is even more striking and more stark in the markets that we inhabit, which is the so-called growth markets around the world. That youth, if it becomes unemployed, becomes a disruptive agent for negativity. If it can be employed through entrepreneurship and through SME growth and through partnerships with government, then it will enable that economy to grow. It will become an agent of positive change. And with governments thinking out of the box, entire ecosystems will change as well. Thank you very much.